All right. So I don't know, Kyle. Have you done any subdivisions since you started your shop? Any parcel maps?
Um, I am currently about maybe a quarter of the way through the first. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, basically one small parcel map is all that I've started here so far, and we submitted the tentative map. So
Okay. All right. And how much of that did you do at your previous jobs, Kyle? I was just curious.
um, basically Bay Area small company, we were doing pretty much everything that came our way, which included a decent amount of parcel maps. And Bay Area's got so many cities, so
Sure.
five, six, seven different cities or something like that. And
Yeah.
um,
Bunch.
and then maybe one final map, but really just
Okay.
small subdivision work for the most part, and all the other stuff that comes with, when you're a small enough business, you just take whatever's thrown at you. So you get
Right.
really good at a lot of different things.
Sure. Okay. So you're familiar with the process then in California, which is helpful. Um, so I'll just mention this for the benefit of the folks that might be listening in later, and I'm not sure how much Colton knows, but so in California we have a two-step process. We basically do what's called a tentative map, which is like the proposed plan of the subdivision. And then our government agencies get to issue what's called conditions of approval. And there's supposed to be, in theory, some limits on what they can ask for. In practice, they ask for whatever they want most of the time. Um, and that's where varies a huge amount by jurisdiction. Um, so I just had a county that I hadn't done a subdivision map in asked me for almost $200,000 worth of technical studies on the simplest ag subdivision I have ever done in my career. It just blew my mind. So like in the two main counties that I work in, that thing would have sailed through. Like he might have had to get a test on his well water. That would have been it, and he'd have been approved. So there's a huge amount of variation here depending on the jurisdiction you're in, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But you do your tentative map, they issue conditions of approval, you meet the conditions, and then you get to go to your final map. I don't know why I didn't understand this for a long, long time. Um, it's just because I didn't do a lot of this work the first 15 years of my career. But the tentative map is almost always way more expensive than the final map. So and that might be different here in California than it is in some other states. But most of the work on the tentative map is actually land planning work and not land survey work. Um, so on a lot of cases, we don't even do the final boundary survey until they get to the final map stage. Because I would say about 70% of the time, the client decides to pull the plug after they get the conditions of approval. That's a not and not maybe it's not 70, maybe it's 50%. I don't know, it's a large proportion. And I always try and talk people out of it in the beginning, um, which is hard to do when you need work. But I always try and talk people out of doing land subdivision work in California, just because the deck is so stacked against the private landowner. I don't know, Kyle. How do you handle that when you get somebody comes in and says, "I want to subdivide"? How do you handle that kind of initial conversation, or how did you at your previous job? I'm just curious. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry. Previous job was a little easier. Previous job being in the Bay Area, a little bit, surprisingly easier to get some things done, and people had more of an idea of what they were doing, had done a little bit more of the research. Right now, I get a call, people say, "Hey, I've got this big lot, I want to divide it." And you go, "You're probably not even zoned to be allowed to do that."
Right.
And on top of that, let's just throw a number out there. Let's say in a dream scenario, we could do it for 5 grand, which it's never going to happen. And they're like, "Oh, I thought it'd be $500." So you're like, "Okay," like, and
Yeah.
usually, my work alone on these things, it's going to be tens of thousands of dollars, and then, all of these rural counties, it can vary so much for based on what they
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
So.
There's a lot of variability. Okay. I'll try and remember. That's a great comment, Kyle. I'll try and remember at the end to talk a little bit about the non-surveyor cost components, because I don't think that was in my list of questions, and it's a great thing to talk about. So the first question I had here was, given the phase nature of the development work, especially in California, should you try and give the client a firm lump sum price for the subdivision, the whole process ahead of time? And I have clients ask me for that on a regular basis. And so, Kyle, I'm just curious if you have it. I have an opinion on that, but I'm curious what you think. So when somebody calls for a parcel map, do you give them a firm lump sum fee to get all the way through?
Never. Uh, I can't, it can change by the time, even my estimate lasts 30 days. The amount of time in 30 days, they can go in there, get a different person in the planning office who tells them it's all these different things. Like, it seems to be so dependent on who they talk to in some of these places. And
Sure.
then after that, who they are developer wise, if they know what they're doing, crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, they can fly through the process sometimes. But those people typically don't reach out to me because I'm such a small firm.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. So I'm like you, Kyle. I don't give people a firm price. I had a guy reach out to me. He was from the Bay Area, and he was in a crazy jurisdiction too. It wasn't San Francisco, but it was ritzy and very anti-development. Might have been Santa Rosa, and he wanted to subdivide an urban lot. And I kind of gave him my spiel. And I don't mind. I will give people a lump sum fee to do the application and the tentative map submittal. I don't mind doing that. Um, but I will not give them a price to get all the way through the process. Um, I'll even give them a pretty firm price, not rock solid, but a pretty firm price on the final map. It's all the stuff that happens in between your first submittal of the tentative and the actual final map that's the variable there. And so this guy was just like he kept demanding he wanted to know 100% for sure, what it was going to cost, my fees, the city fees, everybody else's fees. And I kept telling the guy, like, I just can't give you that level of certainty. I just finally told him, like, it's $1 million. Um, and so the great thing, he just couldn't wrap his brain around that. And I understand, right? This guy's like, he was a small time real estate investor. He bought a lot and thought he was going to, make a killing on it. And the great thing was I went ahead. I don't even know why I did this because he didn't deserve it, but I reached out to the city just to find out, hey, what would the city fees be? And they're like, yeah, T&M will bill you whatever we think. So it's like I no matter what I did, I couldn't give them a fixed price for the whole thing. I couldn't even get a fixed fee out of the city. So that's not super typical, but I would say about, I don't know, 25% or a third of our jurisdictions now do map review, subdivision review on a T&M basis. So you can't even, I have no control over what those fees might be. Okay, so Kyle and I are not that far apart there. I know guys that will give hard lump sum fees to take people all the way through this process, subdivision process. And most of those guys I know are always telling me that they can't make money on subdivision maps. And I think that's part of there's just too much uncertainty. And Kyle had a great comment there about I have people come to me and sometimes and they'll say, "Oh, well, I talked to Susie down at the planning counter and she said all I'll need to do is X." And I always tell people like, "Yeah, that's worth absolutely nothing. First of all, it won't be Susie next Tuesday, it'll be Bobby, and he's going to tell you something different." And like it doesn't matter. Okay, first of all, get it in writing. And even if you have some kind of statement like that in writing from staff, if it's not in the code, if it's not in the ordinances that govern the subdivision like that, people get told stuff at the counter all the time that changes later on in the process. It happens all the time. And members of the public just don't, your client doesn't understand that. They're like, well, Susie told me on Tuesday that it was X. I was like, yeah, well, Susie shouldn't have said that. I just had a client, he's got the zoning to subdivide, and we got his tentative map submitted, and the county came back to us and they're like, hey, there was a mistake when we updated our general plan last time. We should have changed the zoning on this parcel to match the general plan to like a less dense zoning. And they're like, we're not going to let you subdivide. And like my client freaking blew a valve. Like it's in their zoning code, the lot size that we plan for in the subdivision. And now some person at planning's like, oh, that doesn't match up with the general plan. I'm like, I don't care what your general plan says. Like your zoning says this guy can do whatever. It's like 10-acre minimum size lots. And so yeah, there's a lot of that. How do you price that ahead of time? It's really hard to do that. So I'm like you, Kyle. I phase it. And like I said, I don't mind giving people a lump sum fee for the tentative map. That's not to finish the tentative map, though. That's just to make the first submittal of the tentative map and application. The other game that agencies play is, they'll go back and forth on you about how you don't have a complete application. And so what I tell clients is, hey, we're going to make a good faith effort to get you a complete application based on what we can find online and in the code. A lot of jurisdictions have a large amount of discretion in what they can require before they give you a complete application. And that's a game they play in California, right? If I'm in a development friendly jurisdiction, 95% of the time I get a complete application on the first submittal. If I'm in the Bay Area, it might take 4 submittals to get a complete application. You just sometimes you don't know till you get into that process. So, okay, the second question I had here is what specific strategies can land surveyors implement to better track and bill for the time that's normally not billed on these types of jobs, which is your research, your coordination, your problem solving during the condition of approvals. And then, how do you bill that? Do you bill it lump sum or do you bill it T&M? Kyle, do you have anything to say about that? About how you're going to try and do it or how you did it at your previous job?
What I do now is I try to add in everything I can into the estimate, which makes my estimates more expensive than most people's.
Yeah, that's
Um, but there's so much work that goes into everything that people don't factor in. They think you just show up, you do your thing, you leave. But I have hours of admin time that I try to add into my estimates. I've got, just to set up and track your job and see where it's at. I've got phone call time and, all of these different things that I try to guess at what's going to be going in there. But in the end, it just comes out like down to if I'm actually doing this and I'm doing it well, which I typically do not do very well, I should be tracking my time on this project every time I'm working on it and, pressing play when I'm making that phone call.
sure. Okay, so yeah, that's a good comment. So I'm fairly similar to what Kyle does, maybe with one difference. So we try and include the reasonable research and coordination in our lump sum fee. But I always open a coordination phase in our billing system for the job. And anything I do that's kind of beyond that, like getting the job set up and doing the bill, like if I'm on the phone with the title company, if I'm on the phone with the county planner, if I'm answering questions for the client, I'm billing that coordination phase, and I tell my people to bill that. Now, here's the thing: most of the time, I don't get all that money that's being charged to the job, but at least I know what it's really costing me, right? And I think that information is valuable. And we do try and recover as much of that cost as we can. Now, here's what I've started. I've learned a couple things the hard way that I'll share with the group. So I always have a T&M task for coordination on these kind of jobs. I don't do it on every job, but on land development projects, I do it. And I let the client know, hey, if I get on the phone with the planner or with the neighbor's attorney or with your title company, or if I have to answer 5 questions for you every 2 days, like I'm going to bill that time to the T&M task. And I thought I was super smart when I did that until I had 2 or 3 clients that stiffed me on the T&M task, right? You're always way more likely to get stiffed on the T&M task because it doesn't matter how many times you tell the client, they get pissed at a T&M bill. They just do. They just get pissed. And I've learned that the hard way. So now what I do is I just tell everybody if I'm doing a parcel map or we're helping you get a building permit, we're doing a site plan to help you get a building permit or other kind of land development. I just tell them, whatever. It's a $2,500 or $3,000 or $4,000 retainer, depending on the size of the project. And I take that at the front of the project and I bill against it. And when I get done, if there's money left over, I refund the client. And I've done that before. I've refunded clients. I just sent a client a couple months ago. We were doing a fairly big job, and we ended up hitting some roadblocks with the local agency, and the project wasn't going to go through. And I ended up giving them back $8,000. Like they paid me up front. The project died. I cut them a check. Within a week of the project dying, I got them their money back. And so most of that coordination happens in between the tentative map and the final map, and it's on the conditions of approval almost always. And so here's what happens to me, and I'm curious what Kyle thinks, but you get these small subdivisions, and the county comes in and they says, hey, whatever, we want a utility easement, but we don't want it dedicated on the map. We want a separate plat and legal. Or they say, I'm trying to think of some other stupid stuff they ask for. Whatever. We need a LAFCO description because we're going to make you annex into the community services district, or just weird stuff. Well, all right. So like, I didn't price a plat and legal in my proposal, right? Like I didn't price an annexation in my proposal. Or here's another perfect example. Happens all the time. Hey, before we'll approve your subdivision, you got to go get us a technical study from a cultural resources specialist or environmental consultant, right? Okay, well, like, is my client qualified to manage the environmental consultant? No. Even if I ask my client to manage the environmental consultant, guess who's going to manage the environmental consultant? Right? I am. And here's the other thing I've learned too, because I've gotten in this situation. If I'm not dealing with an experienced developer, I tell them I'm billing you to deal with the title company and the other consultants that work for you, because you're going to call and ask me questions and email me, and I'm going to end up doing the work. Like, don't tell me you're going to do it, because you're going to call me with all your questions because you don't know what the heck you're doing. Right. So that's just, I had a couple gals I was working for up in Yosemite, and they hired me to do a site plan. It was a boundary survey and a site plan. It wasn't even a subdivision. And we did the boundary survey, and I did the site plan, and they were asking me for help getting an encroachment permit for a sign on the highway right of way. They were asking me they needed to upgrade their PG&E electrical service to a bigger service. They were asking me for help with that. They were trying to figure out what they needed to do for environmental health to upgrade their water service. Right? They started construction without their permit, and so the neighbor called code enforcement, and code enforcement came out, and they got ticketed for a bunch of crap. Then they were calling me about that. Right. And I finally told this client, like, I need $5,000. Like, I will help you with all this, but I need $5,000. They never called back after that. But they'd have let me run their project for free. Right. And I remember talking to them. It was two real estate agents that bought this parcel outside of Yosemite. And so they're like, I told them, I was like, look, I need $5,000. I will manage your project. I will get you your building permits. And you know what they told me? We don't need you. We're real estate agents. I mean, yeah, you're real estate agents, but you're calling me twice a week to ask questions, right? And so that's the kind of stuff. I mean, that's what bleeds surveyors dry on these kinds of projects, right? It's not your boundary, and it's not even the map. I know how much it costs to do a final map. Like, I know how much it costs to get a tentative map and an application together most of the time, right? Like, what I can't estimate is all the stuff that happens in between. That's really tough. That's really tough. So, all right, let me get to my third question. So it's and this touches a little bit on what Kyle thought. So I'm going to ask it, and then I'll let Kyle comment. So beyond simply tracking your time, which is what we just talked about, how can you demonstrate your value and expertise basically to the client when you're going through this process? So, Kyle, what do you do when your land subdivision clients tell you, I don't understand why this is so expensive? What do you tell them?
I mean, I'm probably the cheapest guy in town to do it, unfortunately. Like,
Okay, well that's a good thing to tell them.
um, I mean, there are probably sometimes I get undercut by other people, and I'm like, they're gonna lose money on this. But Yeah, it's something that I just have been telling people, look, and I have to do this with every single thing now because people think surveys are cheap. And I have to say, look, I've got employees, and employees cost a lot of money to maintain.
Yeah,
Let alone training, like just,
sure.
the taxes I pay,
Yeah.
unemployment insurance, the just general, professional and general liability insurances, all these things that I have to cover. My truck's water pump blew out. That's $700.
I was gonna
So
say 1,200 bucks. Yeah, so you
yeah,
got a good deal.
I mean, yeah, I mean, well, we'll see on Thursday. But all of these things add up so much, and people, I think it's an old talk of Dave Woolley's. He likes to say, like, look, when I get my refrigerator fixed, the guy charges me $600, but I have a fixed refrigerator. And when people hire us, all they get is a piece of paper, and
Right. Yeah,
it's
so
a very tough thing to explain what professionalism and what service you're providing.
yeah, a lot of what we do they don't see, right? Which I think is part of it. So part of it's education. And I'm curious to get your gut reaction, Kyle, to this, but you know what I tell people is, hey, look, I said you got basically two other options, maybe three other options if you don't want me to help you run this project, a land subdivision project. You can hire a giant civil firm. You can hire a land planning company, or you can hire a lawyer. Like those are the other three professionals that might have a shot at this, right? Okay, so the giant civil survey firm is going to be double my rates, right? They're going to be double my price. Uh, Most planning companies do not work for on private projects. They work for cities and counties. Like they're the enemy, right? But like, I don't know, you might be able to talk them into something. I bet most local planning companies in my area wouldn't touch a tentative map. They'd say go hire a surveyor. And I've got some land attorneys that will help you run that project. They bill 3x my hourly rate, and I am the most expensive person. It's like part of what I try and tell people is like, I know you don't like paying my hourly rate. Like I really am your best option for this kind of work, right? Like I tell people all the time, the people that you meet at the counter of your city or county, they are not land use planners. They are land use regulators. Surveyors are land use planners, right? I tell that people, that's an important distinction. We call those people planners. They're not planning anything. What they're doing is telling you what you can and can't do with your own land, right? That is land use regulation. It is not land use planning, right? So I tell people if you need a land use planner, you're probably hiring a land surveyor. And like your other options are going to be way more expensive, which means if you think about that, we are probably not charging enough for that service, right? Because everybody else you can get to do this is charging way more money than we are, right? Most like I work with a couple good land attorneys. Like you get one 15-minute phone call with those guys, and then my buddy Dan, I'll have to send him this so he can listen to it. He'll laugh. My buddy Dan, who's a land attorney, you get a 15-minute conversation with him, and then you guys want to guess what his retainer is. Like you get 15 minutes, and then after that, you want to talk to that guy again. He needs a check. You want to guess what that check is? He's a land attorney. All he does is land attorney. He just does land stuff. He doesn't do anything else. Colton, you want to guess what his retainer is? No, Colton doesn't want to guess. Kyle, what do you think?
I've got a guess, but from my I've talked to Dan once, and I'd say you could probably bring that down with like a nice Sonoma wine.
You probably
Uh,
could.
but 1,500.
I don't think he'll do anything less on a retainer than 5 grand.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Jeez.
like I've been working with Dan for 15 years, probably. I don't think he would let me do a $1,500 retainer. Like Dan, yeah. I think the last time I asked him what his retainer would be for a client of mine, I think he said 8 grand.
Mm.
So like, yeah, there you go. You can hire that guy to run your land development project, right? So yeah, pretty crazy. All right, it's almost 6. Let me jump down to our last question here. Um, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but some of this gets to the ethical. It says considering the competitive landscape, which is what Kyle was talking about a little bit. What are some ethical and professional ways for land surveyors to educate clients about the true costs and complexities of subdivisions, setting realistic expectations from the outset, and avoiding misunderstandings about pricing? So this gets back to a little bit about what I mentioned before is when people come in to sit down with me to talk about a land subdivision, most of those people that hire me and probably that hire Kyle are not sophisticated developers. They've never done this before, right? And so what I try and do is just hit them with a huge baseball bat of reality, because what that means is if people get through that conversation with me and still want to move forward, I feel like that I feel comfortable taking their money. I don't feel comfortable taking people's money and like, look, sometimes we really need that work. But I want to be able to look that client in the eye in 90 days or 6 months and tell them, I warned you about this and you told me to do it anyways. Right. I'm just going to pull something up. Kyle, I'll pull up a doc we put in with our proposals and I'll show you guys. But do you have a gut reaction to that?
I mean, it's different than what I've been doing, and what I've been doing, I've been trying to figure out if it's the path I want to follow, but I basically try to back out of everything that is not a survey matter. And so I treat it like it's a like an ALTA survey where I'm like, not a survey matter. Not, and I tell my clients straight up, I'm like, I will do every single thing that is a survey matter. I will get you all the surveying components, but I am not your land use planner. I don't want to do the land use planning work. And here's the survey packet items. And then trying to not become the land use planner is the hardest part. And you make I was trying to make the most invested person the applicant, which is not me. It's them and, the person who they're
Yeah.
paying to do the planning, hopefully.
Yeah. That's a great comment, Kyle. I do the opposite, and talking to you makes me wonder if maybe I'm stupid and you're really smart.
I mean, look at our profit margins and you're probably doing better.
Yeah, I'm really conflicted about that, Kyle. Here's what I think. I think that's a good approach, especially when you're starting out, and I like that. I wish I would have done that more. What I found is I can get paid to do some of the land use planning and the CEQA stuff, and I can get paid pretty good for it because other surveyors don't do it.
Mhm.
But there's some trade-offs there. Yeah, there's some trade-offs. So I'm not gonna like I think your approach has less stress, I'll be honest.
I go to less meetings probably.
Yeah, that's interesting for me to think about. I like the part of that where it kind of puts the ball back in the client's court a little bit because what I end up doing a lot of coordination because I've kind of made a commitment to take on some of that for the client, whereas you get to tell them, hey, I told you that this, if it's not on the survey map, basically don't talk to me about it. I kind of like that approach. Yeah, so
I
that's
take the municipal code and I check out like this one, this one, this one, this
yeah,
one, not those. And
I kind of
that's
like that. Yeah, that might be
if I was an expert land use planner, which I'd love to be someday, I might
yeah,
try to do more, but I'm not the best person for my client to do some of those things because I haven't gone down to that desk. I do not know who works there. If you need me to talk to the surveyor's office, I can tell you, like in
right. You
Foothill
already know
County, I
that
can
guy.
tell you who works in every one of
Yeah,
those offices,
right. Yeah. No, I
but
got you. Yeah.
but not in planning departments yet.
We might have to talk about that some more. That's a good topic. It's some interesting trade-offs there. I just had a conversation with the client today. He's got an issue on a subdivision that we're helping him with, but basically he needs a secondary access to the highway, and for whatever reason, that the main easement that serves his parcel stops like 50 feet from the highway. There's a gap. There's a parcel there. There's a small parcel there, and there's a gap. And I'm like, hey, I think there's probably an access easement here. But like, I don't have a way to get that for you. Like, you got to call a title company. And like, he got upset because he just wants this done. And I'm like, look, you can jump up and down and scream and pound your fists on my counter all you want. Like, I don't have a title plant. There is no way I'm going to be able to fix this for you. Um, and he finally got me his contact info for the title person he's working with. And I said, look, I'll email him. But like that's kind of what Kyle was saying. Like, look, I am not going to be your title company. And I never told you I was going to be your title company, right? Like you got to get your title company to do their job. I'll show this to you guys real quick and then we'll wrap up. Um, So this is what we send out. This goes out with every land development proposal. So it could be a parcel map or it could be a site plan for a rezone or anything like that. And this just is a standard form. It just says,
Are
hey,
you sharing your screen, Lennon?
oh yeah, I'm sorry. Let me share my screen. That would help. Where's that at? And then I don't mind if you guys ask for this. I don't mind sharing it. I have no problem sharing this with you guys. Um, So I won't read it to you, but it basically says, hey, you know, hold on, I'm trying to move this Zoom bar. It says, hey, although we work hard to help you, like crap happens. And we say, here's the 5 things that could happen. Uh, the requirements are unique, and we don't know all 297 jurisdictions in California. Like the rules in every jurisdiction are unique. Um, and not only are the regulations in each jurisdiction unique, but every parcel is different, right? So you could have 2 parcels in the same jurisdiction across the street from each other. They could have very different requirements. Um, we talked about this. Hey, we can't tell you how much this is going to cost ahead of time. That's right in here. Number 2, in writing, right? Number 3, we don't always know how much work it's going to take to get your project approved. That's related. But we talk about, hey, you might need help from some other consultants. That's number 4. Who might you have to hire? An appraiser, a commercial real estate broker, an environmental engineer, an architect, a civil engineer, a geotech. We just tell them right in there. And by the way, we don't know how much that costs. And we tell them right here, we can help you find and manage those consultants, but you're going to have to contract directly with them. In other words, I won't carry them as a sub. And we can talk about that. There's some reasons why. You need to pay them, and I'm going to bill you my time to manage their work. Right. And then number 5, perhaps the most important one in California, is we tell them, hey, you might have to go talk to some people to get your project approved. You might have to talk to a city council person or a county supervisor. I got a client right now, that client where they want the $200,000 worth of technical studies. Like, he's getting ready to go have a sit down meeting with his county supervisor. And here's what I did for him. I prepared a letter for him to take down there that kind of outlines the technical issues, why we think the county's being ridiculous. But I told him, he's a farmer. I told him, you landowner going down to talk to your elected representative is way more powerful than me, land surveyor consultant, going, I don't vote for that guy. You vote for him. Like, go down and have that conversation. So we just send that out. Um, I tell you what, I've had this save my bacon. Like, I had a guy turn me into the board because he was unhappy that I couldn't get his parcel map approved after I warned him ahead of time. And that was in the proposal. And one of the things that I was able to tell the expert at the board that was reviewing the case was, hey, look, I never promised this guy I was going to get him an approved parcel map. In fact, I told him the opposite. Right. So we send that out with every proposal. And then Kyle had a question. I'm sorry, what was Kyle's question? Oh, how often do you get the call to do just the PM after the tentative map has been approved? Almost never. I think I've had that happen a couple times, maybe twice in my entire career, Kyle, and I'll almost never take those jobs, and here's why. Because either the last surveyor got fired or fired the client, and usually the client gets fired for not paying the bill. And I do, and what the client wants me to do at that point is like reuse somebody else's regurgitated work, and I'm not going to do that usually. The only other situation I get into is I've got a civil that's done the tentative map and thinks he's a surveyor, and those are usually horrible tentative maps. Like, they do stuff like, the minimum lot size is 5 acres, and they've got a parcel on an assessor map that's 5.01 acres, and then they like, in other words, they just they ram things up to the max, right? And then I get to go back and tell the client that they're losing a lot on their tentative map because they actually had 0.02 acres less than the tax assessor map said. It's just that kind of stuff. So, Kyle, I almost never take those. I don't know if I've ever taken one. I've only been asked 2 or 3 times in my career, and I don't know that I've ever taken one because after that kind of initial call, the client and I are like, yeah, they just usually want me to reuse too much work. And I'm just telling them, like, it's
I
hard
see.
to,
Yeah, I
yeah,
see a surprising amount of like crayon drawings for tentative maps because
yeah,
they're not, I mean, a lot of like some of these rural places, they don't necessarily, and even strangely non-rural places will have zero requirement for a surveyor stamp on a tentative map because in the subdivision map act, there's nothing that requires it to be done by a surveyor.
yeah,
And so they're like, well, here, I want to take my square and I want to divide it in half. And you're like,
yeah.
that's, I mean, we can do that. I'm surprised, but it makes it through some planning. I have one right now that in it's like, how is this a thing? I can see that it was prepared by the owner and they're just like, this is what I want to do. And
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, and you know what? A couple times I've seen it, Kyle, has been by like these siteplan.com people,
yeah, that too.
right? And they charge somebody $500. And here's what I'm going to tell them: like, look, I want $12,000 or $8,000 to do a tentative map, and you got it for $500. But now I'm going to want $7,500 to get your tentative map through the process. So people think they're saving money, but usually they're not saving money, right? Because by the time you can get the application accepted and the tentative map approved, you've done the work to take it from a $500 tentative map to an $8,000 tentative map, right? So yeah, that's tough. All right, we're at
Hey,
6:10.
hey, Landon, those
Yep.
those clauses. Hey, Kurt here. Those
Yep.
clauses you were sharing, those are just in your contract for the land development then?
Okay, so they're actually not. We try and keep our legal agreement as simple as we can. It's already like I tried to have the shortest, simplest legal contract I could have, and it's still 5 pages, like no matter how much I tried, just
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that's okay. So what we do is, depending on the type of project, we have what we call inserts. So you're usually 1 page. And so like if we're doing a topo survey, like there's an insert that just goes in there and kind of like in plain language explains to the client, like, we can't see utilities underground, we can't survey under parked cars. It's just like a plain language, it's kind of like a plain language version of what's in the exclusions to the scope. Because what I've learned is nobody reads my scope or my contract. Very few people do, right? But if I put
Yeah.
in, a 1 page or 2 page, it's kind of,
Yeah, like a short insert they could read.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's got like, it's got big subheadings and the paragraphs are relatively
Okay,
short. Like
thanks. Yeah.
sometimes I can get people to read that. Yeah. So I don't mind, Kurt. I can send that to you. We don't have one yet, but I want to do an insert, just a 1 page insert that explains what a record of survey is, why I'm required to do it under state law, and what that costs. Because a lot of times people get my proposal and they're like, you know, Kyle's $3,000 and you're $7,000, and why are you asking me for this record of survey map that Kyle didn't ask for? And Kyle would ask for it, but there's a lot of guys that just don't do records of survey, right? And so what I want is just a little insert that I can drop in my proposal so they know, hey, here's why I'm charging you for that, and it's not because I want to do it, it's because the state of California has a gun to my head and they said I have to do it.
And
Yep.
Sacramento County will charge you $2,000 just to even
Oh,
submit
yeah,
it.
T&M, like, yeah, they won't even tell you how much it costs.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, which is insane. That's a topic
Permitting
for
fees. Yeah.
another conversation. So, anyways, yeah, I don't mind. You know what? I'll try and remember. I think I can attach files in the Facebook group. I'll attach that insert, and then all the haters on there will tear it apart. But I'll be tough.
Okay.
I'll get through it. So, all right,
Sure.
cool.
No, thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Kurt. Thanks, guys. We had a small group tonight, but it was good. I appreciate you dropping in. All right, talk to you next week.
Thanks.